Okay.
Hallo, Andreas Köhler hier vom Kreis Pinneberg.
Hallo, hi. Genau, Herr Köhler, wir springen gleich ins Englische, wenn das für Sie okay ist.
It's okay, it's fine.
Panel. Perfect.
Yes.
So just I will just start and say it's 4 o'clock now, 4 p.m. So welcome back, everybody, or welcome to this event, everybody. I'm very glad that you could all make it. We have a very busy day today with our first green conference on the future of the inner cities, and we already had very interesting, very diverse panels on the future of inner cities regarding trade and commerce, regarding biodiversity, climate change, and climate protection. And I'm really looking forward to this panel, especially where we have some great guests from Copenhagen, where we have great guests from Germany and Schleswig-Holstein. And so just that all of you don't wonder, we will have this third panel hold in English completely because we've got international guests, and this actually is kind of new for the State Parliament of Schleswig-Holstein. We don't often have conferences in English, but I'm really looking forward to it, and I guess we can make it happen and work. There's one slight change in our agenda. Elfie Heesch, the district administrator of the district of Pinneberg, which is close to Hamburg. She couldn't make it on short notice because she was tied up with some COVID business really on really short notice. And I guess we can all understand why it is more important at the moment to deal with the whole COVID situation, especially in her position. So I'm really glad that Mr. Andreas Köhler will be with us today instead of Elfie Heesch. And here's the, I guess, the head of the Department for Services, Legal Affairs and Construction at the Kreis Pinneberg. I guess that fits pretty well. And I'm really looking forward to start this discussion with you today. So to make sure that you know whom we are the Green Parliamentary Group in the State Parliament of Schleswig-Holstein. I am Joschka Knut. I'm the speaker for digital affairs, economic affairs, and some other topics. And I am joined by the head of our parliamentary group, Eka von Kalben, today, as well as my colleagues, Bernd Voss, who's in charge for example, energy transition, climate change, rural areas, and my colleague, Dr. Andreas Tietze, who's in charge for mobility and speaker for housing in our parliamentary group. And I am really looking forward to this this panel where we will more focus on the way the people interact with the space that surrounds them. And I'm very glad to welcome Mrs. Henriette Warmberg, Director of GEL Architects today from Copenhagen, who's with us. I'm also glad to welcome Annegret Hase from the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, and Naomi Al-Qaide as well from Copenhagen, but I guess you grew up in Kiel. And last but not least, Dr. Andreas Köhler, whom I already mentioned. And we will start with 4 presentations. Afterwards, we will have a debate. We will all get together, exchange our ideas, our impressions, and try to find some ideas for our future work and the future development of our inner cities in Schleswig-Holstein. And we will start with a presentation from Henriette Warmberg, whom I'm really glad to welcome to our call because I'm a big fan of your work and all that's going along with it. And we already talked about my special relationship to Copenhagen, so I guess it perfectly matches up that you are here, and I'm glad to give the word to you, the digital stage to you, and we are really looking forward to hear about your work and about your approaches and thoughts on the transformation of inner cities and how to make cities for people.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you on what looks like a very interesting seminar. I also think it's a great opportunity now when we are just one click away from Germany, that we can travel and share insights across. So thank you for the invitation. I'm sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Then I'll try to ask it to go to yes, that also works. Then I will try to move us a little bit to the side. At Gale, we are located in Copenhagen, but we also have 2 different offices in the US. We've been around for a long time. So Steady for Menschen is a newer book, but Jan already wrote Lebensraum in 50 years ago. So Jan has been around for a long time. The office has been around for around 20 years now. And we work with the purpose of translating the research and the understanding of people in cities and trying to improve, put focus on public life and public space and trying to improve the conditions in cities for human interaction. And I'm starting just with what should be a short fly-in on how public life has changed over the years, on how 100 years ago, there were much more necessary activities taking place. Maybe they come here. So necessary activities, things we had to do, so selling goods or going to work and whatever. And what has changed over the years is that we don't have to spend time in public space, but we choose it. And that's where the quality of the city and the quality of the spaces is way more important now than it was before, where we had to be there. So the lively cities very much relate to the quality of the city, and there's been a huge change in how we use the cities over the years. If we look at Copenhagen, this has changed quite a lot also from starting from 1962 with the first pedestrian street. So the Strøget was pedestrianized in 62. And since then, this whole network of spaces have been added to form quite a different types of spaces and different opportunities, different ways of interacting with each other. What has changed also is the whole way that public life has developed. So developing an urban culture that constantly changes and responds to the physical spaces around. So when the harbor has changed in Copenhagen, so has the public life or the way that we use the space. And Copenhagen has done a lot of work in terms of formulating policies for public life, Metropolis for People from 2015, that was starting to set targets and is a policy that is also driving change in the city, forward looking. So it's not just about nice to have, but it's a very strong strategic target to increase the number of or the percentage of Copenhageners participating in public life and who also spend time there. So this is this way of setting targets and measuring them has been an instrumental way of also changing Copenhagen over the years. Then, not to make this extremely long, but just to say we started out with primarily focus on the shopping city. We've seen in a number of the European cities the rise of pedestrian streets, going to the city to shop. And that has changed over the years, where the city is more also focusing or being better at being the recreative city where we meet each other and where we spend time. So new types of spaces have been added. It's not just about going to the shops. It's also about experiences. It's also about meeting other people. The more playful city is certainly something that has grown in Copenhagen, that we use the city as a playground for all ages and that we can have fun. It's not just about spending money, but it's also about activities, physical activities, or playing. The temporary city, so testing out different configurations, has also been going on for at least the past 10 years, and even before then, instead of doing permanent design straight away, we're testing out different solutions or different ways of arranging things that can also be done in collaboration with citizens, so that we can have an engagement process as part of this. So a fundamental change is that we know that retail is changing. This has been kind of the main content for many years in cities that we come to the city to shop, and the pedestrian streets have been the blood vein of cities. But obviously we know this is changing, and it has been for a long time, with the shopping malls outside the city center growing and attracting shoppers to go there. We also know that internet trade is going up. I'm sure you've already discussed this. So we see in Denmark 30% of all retail trade on the internet, again, just one click away, and this is continuing. This one is an article saying that there has never before been so many vacant shops. The interesting part is maybe that this was written the day before the first corona lockdown in Denmark. So the problem has been there for a long time, and maybe what we are going through now is just reinforcing that tendency that was already happening. So with retail changing and maybe still being a main player, but maybe not taking up all of the content of the city, that leaves an open question on what is then the new players that can come in, what's the new content, what can we use the city for also. And some cities have been going on. This is Horsens, a bit to the north from where you are, that have been redefining their pedestrian street and starting to talking about from walking street to recreation street. How do we spend time there? How is it also a meeting place? And it's not just for shopping, but it's also a living room for the city that we can use for different purposes. Also, we've been working with the cultural district in Copenhagen, which is also changing, and has been for a while. This is an area in the city that has always been strong in terms of doing cultural nights, so displaying one time a year. All cultural institutions are open at night, and you can go in and out, and they use the public space outside. But the wish is really to focus at how are they more visible and how are they more active players also outside the institution, and also how do they collaborate stronger and more with each other. So part of the work that we did with them was to look at, to the left, how many visitors they've actually got, which is quite a lot. So this is where the parliament is. This is Tivoli, National Museum. It's the art institutions, and it's congregated in a very central part of the city. But what we also see to the right is that this is an area that is completely deserted after 5. No one there. It's very few lights, and it's completely deserted. So it's a place that functions within opening times and working times, and then it closes down after 5, while the rest of the city is very active. So there was a big wish in terms of seeing the rest of the city has changed, but we haven't. How can we take part in what's going on outside? How can we challenge the way that our institutions were built? How can we make more use of the outdoor space? And to the right is just a Nolly map from Rome, looking at how can we also think the public spaces of the city as both inside and outside, and how can the two link more together? And is there a way, for example, for the National Museum that is looking at a rebuilding now, to allow public access to the ground floor of the museum, and allowing ticketing to happen further up in the building, but being more part of this public space network? Other ideas and thoughts were around opening up frontages, opening up gates to have a look at the inside, but also displaying some of the inside outside, and also being part of events. So what's currently being planned now is that we're still waiting for the Tour de France to arrive in Copenhagen. It's been extended for a while, but then the cultural district will be a main player in terms of one of the fan spots related to that. So how do you connect culture with the events, and how do you use public space as a meeting ground for that? What is, of course, also changing is working life. We experience that right now. We are all sitting in front of our computers. This was also happening before Corona, and it's increasing. And this also talks about different workplace fit outs that we ask for different users when we come to work. Some office buildings start more to look like the city, that you have the square where you meet, or you have the cafe, and you have an increased demand for meeting places, so that we can work together, and that it's a different type of work that we do in the office than what we do at home. Also, in other countries, we see this increase in private sector investing in outdoor public spaces that is built for, planned and paid for by private sector, but which is publicly accessible and publicly used. So that blend between private and public is happening more and more. And also we see that the life we lead, in our local neighborhoods is changing as well. So during the lockdown we've had last year, the local neighborhood has increased in importance and value. And what we need, the services around that is, and the green spaces we can go to, the offerings that are there will be increasingly important when we look over time. Also, just to throw in some very, big challenges that we have in the world today. It's way more complex than when Jan started out 50 years ago with Lebensraum. So, there's a lot of challenges around health. I think you know that very well also. A lot of, we sit down too much, just like we do now, and we're not active enough. So how can these spaces help us to change those patterns? And for someone from Copenhagen, you have to squeeze a slide with a bicycle in somewhere. So we know that bicycles, that is one component of challenging this fact and actually doing some good for the city, freeing up more space for other users, but actually also doing something very important for health. So this slide says, we live approximately 7 years longer if we have a half an hour ride to work or university. In Denmark, very important, the longer we live, the more we work, the more tax we pay. So what's good for you is also good for society. We also know access to green space, we live longer, it's better for our health. So all of these components are incredibly important. In Copenhagen, there's been a strategy called Copenhagen Together, which is on the website as well. And this is looking at, with all these complex issues that are coming in, we need to change the way we think and the way we collaborate. And we won't have the magical plan, but we need to have a strategic creative thinking. We need more players in there. We need more trust to the different players, to different stakeholders and investors and citizens. We need more human scale, so more thoughtful ways of building the city that can allow public life to happen and also can invite people to live in the city. We need a more holistic thinking. So we've got the kroner or the dollars need to cover more. So we need to put more agendas together around health, around climate action, and around social inclusion. So how can we think more of these agendas together? And how can we do it through dialogue and collaboration with a great variety of different people? And I've got still a couple of slides to go through. So climate action, cloudburst is happening. We know that from all cities. This was Copenhagen some years ago, completely drowned in rain. And this has really set the big torch on what can we actually do about it. And it's taking a huge investment from the city in terms of working to improve those conditions so that we won't flood. But it's also looking at, when we do those investments, what are the other components that we can get out of that? Not just flood protection, but it's also about public life. It's also about collaborating. This is one specific test area that was taken out, which is called the climate quarter. And which is a very typical area of Copenhagen, too much tarmac, too much underutilized space, and not a lot of use or traffic or users that needed that space. So what was done here was, together with the people who lived in that neighborhood, to start a collaboration process around what could other uses be in the area? So when we invest in the flood protection, what are the other things that we should make sure that we also build into it? And how do we also get people on the journey so that they're okay with giving up some of the car parking because they get something else instead? So it's not a question of driving cars out, but and also here there's plenty of space for them, but it's about gaining something that's way more viable and important, and making sure that there's ownership and interested in using the space afterwards. So unfortunately, there was a huge drought just a year after this was built, so it was very dry. But luckily, the year after, we had a typical Danish summer of lots of rain, and this is really working, and it's also proving to be a great amenity for the people in that particular area. Other parts have been about roof farms and greening the roofs in that area as well. So growing food locally. And because I'm running out of time, I think maybe you know Paris. So it's all about this: what can we do to improve the cities, and what are actually some of the very drastic measures we have to introduce to be more climate adaptable and rethink the use of streets quite drastically. This is another project we're doing in Copenhagen together that was actually started with Tivoli. It's looking at a main artery or main street that leads from the central station to Town Hall Square. And here the suggestion is to make a big open park in a part of the city where there's not a lot of green. It is also part of the historic fortification ring, so it used to be green. And this is something that where you would think maybe that would be quite hard, but it's proving actually to be not easy, but it's got a lot of support from all ends of the local government in the municipality of Copenhagen, and might well happen within the next couple of years, because there is this strong need to completely rethink how we use the space between the buildings. Also, I think I need maybe a finger if I need to start to slow down or close, because I think I might have 3 minutes left. But you just wave at me and then I start to close it down. Other parts have been about these slip lanes, which is quite underutilized space in the city of allowing a few cars to make a shortcut and having free parking spots. And this is paid, this is privately funded and privately initiated by the property owner, who of course is interested in the value catch on the building, but has also completely recognized that this is something that could be way better utilized and can give a completely different experience. You can have green, but you can also offer a place in the city, again in an area of the city where there's not a lot of open space to spend time in, but where there's a big need for people to sit down, not necessarily only on the cafe, but also on the bench to enjoy a nice part of the city. The last bit is around 5 zones. This is looking at air quality and tying it to city planning. And it's also looking at young kids. So these are some of the very heavy topics that we know that children's brains develop, 90% of them, before they're 5 years old. But also that this is a time where they actually, the impact from poor air quality is way heavier on small kids than on adults. So there's a huge impact for the whole development of small kids in the very early age. And this project looked at how can we measure air quality in a particular neighborhood in Copenhagen and compare it with measures and data around how that particular neighborhood is also used by small children, so that we get a better understanding of where the kids are most exposed, but also how we can start to influence patterns. What other streets or areas could they use more? What could be more inviting for them? But also what do we need to fix to make the conditions for them better? And this was done together with a number of partners below. So the Google Streetcars with a bit of Utrecht University data collection gear, and a Dutch foundation, Bernard van Leer, on it. So data on the air quality was collected, and looking at what are the most heavy levels, and then that was combined with what's the experience of this neighborhood and how is it used, and particularly how is it used when you're 3 years old and this is your general height. So we had this little guy equipped with a webcam and others as well. And I'm not sure if the video works, but just this kind of what's the experience at that age, and how do we understand the patterns of these kids when they move around in the city. Yeah, so I think we can skip that. So that then laid out this network of where can we invite for cleaner air routes, so areas that are not so exposed, and what are the specific areas where we have to reduce the exposure to air pollution. 2 slides left, I think. So yeah, we know this is one of them where we have to reduce the impact. There's a lot of people are using the street for cafes and whatever, and you have the pram and the small kids. There's another one approaching in the background, exposed to quite heavy traffic volumes, but also parking of cars, at slow speeds going in and out, and all these fumes coming out. So what do we do to actually make that a better situation? And a pilot was done, so a test case of what could be done about it. And it's very much about this. Yeah, we need to think about where we place the parking and who is exposed. We need to traffic calm so that we don't have in very densely populated areas that we have a lot of problems with air quality. We also need to increase the distance from the traffic and install more green in those areas. So I think this is my final slide, and it's just saying if we moved away from the pretty streets, that's fine. But now it's really about a lot of other stuff. It's about the public health, it's about biodiversity, climate action, social inclusion, and it's good for economy as well. So it is about all these huge issues and not just about pretty streets. And that was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Henriette Warmberg, because I guess that perfectly summed up and also lined out what we need to do. It summed up what we were talking about in the earlier panels, and brought some ideas together in an approach that is holistic, and also I guess we all got some ideas on where we got to work on in the future to come. And so thank you very much. And I guess that is a perfect basis for a deep dive discussion in the next 1.5 hours. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm really looking forward to our next presentation as well, which will be held by Dr. Annegret Hase from the who's working for the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research. Dear Annegret Hase, I'm glad to welcome you to our panel as well, our debate, and I guess you can just share your presentation and start.
Yes, thank you very much. I will just try to share my presentation. Yes, can you see it?
Yes, perfectly.
It's perfect. I just try to get it into the, yes, now it's the right mode. Yeah, thank you very much for this invitation. And it was exciting for me to listen to the first talk. Indeed, there are some overlaps to what I will tell you, but I think if you heard twice, sometimes it's even good for being strengthened. I'm an urban sociologist working at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig in Germany, and I'm dealing with urban sustainable development, urban transformations, and also with a very different socio-spatial and socio-environmental processes in cities. I'm rather dealing with the inner city or inner city neighborhoods in a wider sense, not with the city center itself, but I'm dealing with the city from as a living environment, from a multifunctional perspective, an interdisciplinary perspective. And out of this perspective, I would like to share some reflections with you that might be helpful for our discussion. The occasion for this discussion today, I think, was surely the Corona crisis, which produced pictures and perceptions of the inner cities that are disturbing, frustrating, sad. As in a burning glass, existing problems and shortcomings become visible. And for a moment, possibly, one can be inspired by emptiness, abandonment, but in the long run, this is, of course, no vision or no future for sustainable use of the inner city. Next to these impressions, the Corona crisis pushed forward an already existing debate, and this was the talk before, on the decay or abandonment or functional bias of our inner cities, about the need to discuss their future and to discuss how this future should look like. Implicitly, I think this includes also a lot of criticism with respect to the current use and function of the inner city, and a clear acknowledgement of the shortcomings that need to be addressed and dealt with. In my work, I often use the term or approach of multifunctionality. And what does it mean with respect to the inner city? I will not read out the boxes that I put here in detail, but we see that there are many that we can find to a larger or smaller extent as functions of the inner city. I put some question marks there where I'm not sure to what extent today's inner cities really fulfill this function anymore, or where I'm sure that they do not or not sufficiently. So what is the situation that we face today? Today's challenges, to my mind, are a biased functionality or a lost multifunctionality of many inner cities. There's a strong commercialization and a focus on shopping, tourism, dining, etc. A lot of functions are more or less lost, the residential function, then the real interaction function, so as a place for many people to meet, and the recreation function without being a consumer. There is overpresence and an absence of different groups of people in the inner city due to these conditions. And I think at many places, a lack of places to stay, rest, play, perform, etc. Of course, it was talked about in the first presentation, there are conflicts between different traffic types, and there are too few areas in many inner cities without cars. And an absence of, first and foremost, larger and diverse green and open spaces, and an overuse of existing ones. When we think about the impacts of the Corona crisis, I think the crisis is, of course, not the cause of the problems, but it makes the problems visible, gave speed to debates on shortcomings of the inner city of today. We can also say it operates as a catalyst function, but also as a potential window of opportunities for change. But we should also consider that it might be also an obstacle for change, so that due to the crisis, there are other priorities, there's a lack of resources, etc. So it's a window of opportunities if we want, and if we can just make it, or at the same time, it can be also an obstacle. The questions I think that we need to discuss is, what should be the inner cities of tomorrow look like? What do we want to see there? For whom should they be accessible, attractive, beneficial? And do we really want to return to the so-called normality as it was before the crisis? My answer to this last question is, of course, no. And I think I will just offer you some ideas from my perspective, and I just reduced it to 4 words, which I will just then expand on a little bit more in detail. This is sustainable, inclusive, creative, green. Of course, it is a selective choice, it is biased, it is subjective due to my research interests and expertise. But anyway, this is what I would like to bring into the discussion. And I mean sustainable in terms of ensuring a long-term perspective for the inner city as a livable and multifunctional place. Inclusive in terms of making the inner city a place which is accessible, usable, and attractive for all people living in a diverse city. Creative in terms of giving space for ideas and innovation, for experimental settings and discussion, and understanding creativity as a source of resilience. And green in terms of making inner cities being places which with enough open and green space for making people stay and increase well-being. I think inner cities should be attractive places for diverse wants and needs. I think it's important to integrate those who are mostly absent today, underrepresented today. Think of children, migrants, older people, disabled people, many different kinds of urban dwellers, many different wants and needs, different speeds and noise levels. And I think we have to think of criteria and ways to make different people feel well here. The first talk already introduced some very interesting ideas according to this topic. The loss of the residential function of many inner cities is not a natural law. A certain share, I think, of housing in the inner city would bring life to it also outside the times when most shops and offices are open. It would also bring back a type of daily routines that refer to people behaving in their residential environment, doing their daily things. And this should again be a part of city center life, I think. Of course, it would be crucial to reflect on how this could be made possible. And of course, inner city housing should be affordable and accessible for many and not be organized only by market logics only. I know that it's a challenge, but I think it's also an issue we should discuss about. Yeah, creativity. It was already mentioned in the first talk. When the city center should become an attractive place for many, I think the process of redevelopment has to be a participatory one. This makes sure that many ideas can become part of the process and that changes that will be implemented have a larger legitimacy. Clearly, we know participation has also its limits, but I think it works well already in the neighborhood scale. So why not explicitly go for it when the city center change is being discussed, planned, and implemented? Experimentation, rethinking places, as it was said for Copenhagen, could enrich a discussion process. Temporary experiments could show and prove the feasibility and acceptance of different ideas. Last but not least, I think inner cities should have more green, open, and workable space. They should provide a certain share of open space. It is not just green space, but also open space where people can stay, rest, recreate, meet each other, perform, and also some place for experimentation and spontaneous things. There should be a focus on pedestrian, public, and bike traffic. And that would mean for me to put emphasis on people and their speed and desire to walk, meet, chat, rest, etc. And I think also greening and providing open space and slow traffic solutions would make inner cities also more resilient to crisis, less vacant and abandoned as we experience it currently. So in a nutshell, to become more sustainable, inclusive, creative, and green places, inner cities have to, I think, turn away from the primacy of economy and commercialization as the background of decision-making, strengthen the public sector and also public interests, provide more functionality, more multifunctionality, or return to more multifunctionality, allow for multiple and flexible use of space, operate, and I think it's a great challenge, as a mirror of the local urban society as a whole, not just of some groups of the urban society, and provide a balance between speeds, noise levels, attention, and have a high attention to different wants and needs. And the large question is that feasible? Is that makeable? Or do such proposals fail due to economic reasons or other prioritizations? What should be our benchmarks or yardsticks for prioritizing or decision-making? And what does it mean in economic, financial, etc. terms when we take it seriously to make sustainability, inclusiveness, resilience the yardsticks for shaping the inner city of tomorrow? And of course, also how to bring all these different ideas in line with each other, how to make multifunctionality that in theory is great, working as well in practice. Of course, I do not have ready-cut solutions here, but this is what we should discuss together, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you for the moment.
Thank you very much for this presentation, and I guess this was a perfect combination of these two presentations, because the one showed us like the ideal laboratory world we could Copenhagen probably call, where we have to learn so much, or where we can learn so much from, but on the other hand, where we see that it works, and on the other hand, I guess we really got the impression on where we stand at the moment in Germany and which challenges we face. But we also see that we in Germany know that there are solutions and how these solutions can be put into place. And I guess that was super interesting for me from your presentation. I'm really glad to take up your question on whether we should return to a pre-corona situation, probably, where the answer can only be no, I guess, but we will debate this later on. But now we will come to the next presentation, and we were talking a lot in this last two presentations about the way people interact with urban space and the urban environment, but also the way society needs to be involved in urban development. And this is where Naomi Al-Qaeda will join us with her presentation on participation, on inclusive participation in urban planning, and the key question on how we can hear the quiet voices in urban planning, which is, from my point of view, a very important perspective, especially for us as a Green Party. So Naomi, welcome, and I'm glad you're with us, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Joschka, and thank you to my two predecessors for those two really great presentations that connect quite well with my presentation on inclusive participation in urban planning and the hearing of the quiet voices in development projects. I will briefly go through reasons for why we should have participation processes and why they will be worth the effort, followed by a short overview of how we should interact and organize such participation processes, concluding with some brief takeaways in the end. Mrs. Wambeck said in the beginning that now we have the luxury of choosing to go to the inner cities instead of having a need to go, especially in changing working modes and in times of more mobility. Inner cities will only be lively if people choose to go there. And I think very few people would argue whether or not we need experts to decide on what we should do in planning, which means that architects will always be involved, engineers will always be involved, politicians, administration. But if we look at what city centers oftentimes look like, it's the people who we want to see there and who we need to make city centers lively spaces. And therefore, I think we need to make the people that we want to see in the city, but no longer meet there, the experts in having their say in decision-making on what to do with those spaces. Another reason is that it increased the acceptance and legitimacy of decisions. Oftentimes this is used as an alibi to do participation because a lot of people think that it breaks down the resistance of the population if you pretend you asked them beforehand. But if you look at my third point, that it can strengthen the local democracy, it becomes clear that participation should not be just that. It should actually be a point of connecting with the population. And if you look at political developments in recent years and the rise of populist parties and movements in our society, I think it's even more important that we actually learn democracy and how to live democracy, which goes beyond going to elections every few years and putting your crust on the ballot, I think. thinking that most of us will probably agree on this as the foundation for what we want to do, I would like to move on to asking how we should interact with the people and how we should ask them for their opinion. And if we look at what participation traditionally has looked like, we see a public forum on the left-hand side and a workshop set up on the right-hand side. And I'm not showing these pictures to use them as bad examples. I think they should be part of almost any participation process, but they should not be the exclusive mode of participation. On the left-hand side, you see information set up where people have been informed about a future development plan, probably followed by a Q&A session with the possibility to comment on what has been proposed by professional experts. Let's call them professional experts for now. On the right-hand side, we see a workshop, which is usually set up in connection with architectural competitions, where the population is invited to comment on designs that have already been selected by a professional jury, and are invited to comment on them. If we look at those two images, we have an image in our head probably as well of the people that we can reach by having this kind of participation, which limits the sample of people we reach to a very small share of the population that is part of an urban community. We limit ourselves to the people who are able to attend and communicate in a public forum, which includes limitations in terms of language, education, confidence, and also to some extent education of understanding the terms and technical plans that are usually presented in such meetings. And I think it is quite obvious that this is not a representative group of the population of a city. And this leads us to my actual foundation for this presentation, inclusive participation. We want to involve all those who we do not meet in the city center anymore, because they are the ones who we want to get back there. And in the previous presentations, it was already quite clear that it will not be as easy as opening up a few new nice stores or putting down a few trees. I think cities today and cities in the future will be much more complex than that, actually. And inclusive participation is quite a lengthy process, which can be cut short, but it should be considered worth it if we accept the fact that it's the people who will be the experts on the space they're supposed to be using later on. And as a first step, we need to determine the target groups of who do we want to get back to the site that we were talking about. Do we want the sample to be representative of the city population? Do we maybe want to focus on groups that are traditionally underrepresented in the traditional formats? Maybe we want to target specifically women in safe spaces. Maybe we want to target children, students, elderly. And if we select the target groups, we need to consider the obstacles that come with those target groups. Are there obstacles in terms of language, education, physical capability? And of course, also organizational factors such as at what time do we want to address those people? Because we do not want to exclude people working in shifts, taking care of their children or elderly, or who are physically incapable of attending a meeting in the city center, which leads to the second point. Assuming we want something from the people, it should be a small step to deciding that it's actually us who should go to them to hear what they have to say. And that is summarized with the term outreach participation. And especially if we think about vulnerable groups and underrepresented groups, there usually is some translation aspect that we need to include in our planning process of participation, which is cultural sensitivity when reaching specific groups. It usually is worth accessing specific groups through their networks or contact intermediaries. because not everyone will speak to everyone in every place. So that's something that we should keep in mind. And that, of course, leads to the choice of appropriate tools. And we have different tools that will reach different groups of people, obviously, especially in times of the global pandemic. I decided to put online participation down as the first point, since it is quite an appropriate tool to reach a young population. Most people will be found online, especially nowadays in times of home office. And they're both free softwares that are available online, which makes this whole obstacle of financing good participation less of an argument. We do have to keep in mind that this does not give us access to other groups of the population, like the elderly. They're quite innovative participation ideas which are executed in other parts of Germany. There's a participation bus which has been used as a tool in Hanover and Stuttgart, for example, where they have a little wood workshop next to a poster exhibition of plans of what could be done in a specific site that we want to get the people's opinion on, and where people have on the upper floor of the double-decker bus, for example, space to do interviews and talk to experts who will then write down the notes and bring this back into a more formalized format. There is event participation, which is something that is difficult to use if you want to reach a large sample of the population, but is quite efficient to reach a very specific group. You can either say that you want to send out invitations which are randomized and then add a specific sample of the population on top of that, or you can decide that you want to address a population with a migration background, so you will probably use an intermediary. And in Ludwigsburg, I think was where it has been used, it's called Kochlöffeldialog or Project Salt and Butter. And they have invited people to attend a cooking class. And afterwards at the shared dinner, there was a chair who has been writing down the notes. And during dinner, there was a slightly shared conversation on a given development project. And those are just short examples of what could be done instead of doing a formalized public forum as the first go-to tool for public participation. And since I have to come to an end, as I just saw, I will summarize some takeaways. We should keep in mind that it is us who want the input of the people, assuming that they are the expert for what we are trying to do with a given site. In this case, let's assume the city center, and therefore we reach out to them. And it is our job to do the research of selecting the target groups and selecting the appropriate tools to reach that target group. And to refer back to one of the first points that I made, if we want participation to be a pillar of democracy and a factor that strengthens local democracy, we should keep in mind that we should only ask questions to which the answers are still open. Alibi participation does more harm than good and should therefore be avoided at any time. And if we keep all those points in mind, participation might be quite some effort, but it is worth it, as well as the time and the money. And I'm looking forward to discussing some of this later on and maybe translate it to a more Schleswig-Holstein type of case.
Super cool. Thank you very much, Naomi. And that was totally on point, content-wise as well as time-wise. So thank you very much. And I'm really glad we have you in this panel and have your experience and your perspective on those issues of urban development and inner city transformation here in our panel. So thank you very much. And I guess there were some great points we can come back to in our discussion. So now I would like to come to the final presentation. I guess I'm not so sure whether you have a presentation. I'm just gonna see whether you have one, Mr. Köhler.
No, I have
no presentation. So you're just gonna speak. Perfect. So thank you very much for being with us. I guess we were supposed to talk about the new Leipzig Charter, I guess. With Elfie Hirsch, and I guess you can talk about that as well. So welcome, and feel free to give us your ideas on how we can implement the new Leipzig Charter and how we bring life to this idea of the new Leipzig Charter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Knut. Yes, sorry for the missing Mrs. Hirsch. She's apologizing for her absence because she's really on the COVID theme topic with Mrs. Breen, I think, and they're talking about schools and kindergarten opening in our county. She gave me a call at the moment. She's on the phone, but okay. Yes, I prepared this session with my colleague Andreas Trader, and I'm very glad to take this part from her to bring the interesting ideas from her to you. So I talk about something about the new Leipzig Charter into practice. That's the topic of this session. So she wrote, "Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, Mrs. Hay thanks you for the kind invitation to this very interesting and important debate on the future of our cities, and especially of our inner cities, which are undergoing a significant transformation process, not only since COVID-19, but heavily forced by COVID-19. I will divide my statement into 3 parts. The first topic, the central messages of the new Leipzig Charter. The second topic is the challenges in the suburban area of Hamburg. And the third part is transforming the inner cities in the county of Pinneberg, some ideas for a practical approach. I'm starting with the central messages of the new Leipzig Charter. The new Leipzig Charter for Urban Development was adopted on the 30th of November 2020 at an informal meeting of the EU ministers responsible for urban matters. The Charter reflects the principles of modern urban development policy and is a result of a two-year communication process at the national and the European level. Together with the territorial agenda of the EU 2030, the Leipzig Charter can be seen as an important strategic document. It can also be seen as a basis for the urban development of tomorrow, which is facing several challenges. They become obvious at the climate change and especially at the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic hit the inner cities very hard and requires new conceptions for the overall living conditions and for the transformations of our city centers. Urban development is not only about housing and construction, it must take the whole urban living space into considerations. The new Leipzig Charter emphasizes the transformative power of cities for the common good and welfare. It provides a framework for national, regional, and also local authorities to foster more resilient and sustainable cities, as well as functional urban areas like our metropolitan regions. To achieve the Charter names 5 key principles of good urban governance. I've heard my earpods are empty. In a few minutes, I change to the iPad. But now they're still working. The 5 principles, the 5 key principles. The urban policy for the common good. the integrated approach, the participation and co-creation, and place-based approach. It is not to us, to the authorities, to stakeholders, to planners, to politicians, and to the whole civil society to meet these principles and to consider the new Leipzig Charter as a framework, which has to be filled with life, with a painting that gives our cities life. I would give you some ideas about how a county can support their communities to revive the inner cities. Before I do that, I would like to focus on some of the main challenges of regional and urban development in the suburban area of the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg. I think the most of you know the county of Pinneberg, Hilka von Kalben especially. But for the others, the county of Pinneberg is area-wise the smallest county in Schleswig-Holstein, but in relation to the population, we are the greatest. No, I think we are the biggest, I think. Being directly neighborhoods to Germany's second largest city, Hamburg, the county of Pinneberg shows the typical challenges of suburban area. In particular, that means pressure of settlement and consequently land consumption, too little amount of housing and needs-based flats for aging population, as well as health and care service for aging population, and modern mobility, including urban mobility. The transformation, the inner cities in the county of Pinneberg, some ideas for a practical approach. COVID-19 is transforming city life by social distancing, closed shops, empty restaurants, and restricted access to public spaces. We heard it at the ideas from Annegret Hase. She also told about that situation. Society has been changing immensely for years, especially because of more online shopping. Our towns are characterized by owner-managed little shops. Not all of them are digital, well-positioned. You could find empty shops in the best parts of our towns long before COVID-19 came to us. And the pandemic accelerated this development very hard. That will be the same in your areas and towns, especially in the little towns. But let me change the perspective. The pandemic offers also opportunities. I think just now people get known that it is up to them to revive the cities. Just now, they want to meet each other in the cities. They want to eat in the cities. They want shopping experience in the cities, as maybe they want to work in co-working places in our inner cities because they don't have to commute each day to Hamburg. I think now is the time to think about the different use of space in our towns and cities post-COVID-19. We must think about developing a mixed use of places and spaces and open them for invitations. Invitations, yes, and innovations. We must invest in new and independent business, create interconnected neighborhoods and attractive meeting places for residents. The new inner cities should combine and not separate working and living, culture, sports, health, service, green space, and clean transport. And the county could establish a new collaboration platform, like an open table with our cities, with our policy, and other key players, associations, and important actors. Maybe also our economic development agency can play an interesting and important role. Making local stakeholders part of the process and improving the communication with and between them is the key to success and to an integrated place to live in. And I think Naomi Kaida told us also that that participation is one of the parts, but I think also the collaboration is one of the solutions that we have faced here. And just after the pandemic, it's important to give an optimistic mood and trust in future. Now, in our country, we first have to manage the pandemic. You see, LPH is working on that. And nevertheless, we are looking now how we can do this in our county. Thank you for your attention. And I'm facing the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Köhler. And thank you again for jumping in on such short notice. I'm really glad that we are having this perspective in this debate as well, and that we come to the discussion now. I myself have a lot of questions and ideas and would love to throw them in, but I promised I would let my colleagues ask questions and give their opinion on these topics. So I would first of all ask Eka von Kalben whether you have any questions or thoughts on what we just heard. I guess there can be a lot, and afterwards I would hand over to my colleague Andreas Tietze. So Eka.
Thank you. I just have to order my questions. Yes, thank you very much for all this very interesting stuff. And I'm really glad to hear it from Copenhagen. But my question is a little bit, why are we in Germany so late with all this development? And we had in some other panel the question, has it to do something with our mentality? You know, is the German Gründlichkeit, which how we call it, something which is something like a boundary to change something, and so maybe it has to do with this. And our cities maybe, or I think that our cities are very specific. They're not as intercultural as our society is. You know, we have some cities which are very much students, and others where are no students. We have cities where are more elderly people, and others where the young people go. And even in the cities, we have very different complexes also with people with migration or not. And so this is maybe something specific. And you know, my questions go all my questions go there. How can we learn from other cities and other countries? And my question to the participation, Naomi, which is a very interesting point, and we are looking very much also about direct democracy. We are the only party in Germany, I think, who really are open-minded to other participations. But every time we go on to have a different participation, and more including also, we have the problem, how can we come to the people? How can we invite them? And what's about the deciding? You have it in one post, there was something, we should only ask questions when it's really open, the question. But it's also, we have a democracy, and of course the deciding is in the parliaments. I think should stay in the parliaments. And you know, we sometimes have a problem then. How can we deal with this? And to Mr. Köhler, thank you very much that you came in this panel. And of course, you said the local stakeholders should be included. When I think about the Pinneberger Innenstadt, for example, and we heard that we changed from a commerce city to a creative activity city, how can we get the stakeholders? Because they say, okay, we close our shops, so we are not in anymore. So how can we find stakeholders for the cities?
Thank you very much.
I hope it came clear with my English.
Yes, yes, of course. Thank you very much, Eka. I would just probably recommend that we just start a first answer round and then take a second round with your questions, Andreas, if that is okay with you, because there were a lot of questions. And if I may just add one question, because it's like it is so closely related to Eka's first questions on why we are like so late in Germany and what's the matter with our German thoroughness that we don't get forward. I would like to ask Henriette Warmbeck, what are the key drivers for development in Copenhagen? So how does the cooperation with the municipality work? Are they so interested in this development, or are they sometimes like on the break in Copenhagen as well, and you would like the developments to be faster? So that is just to be added to Eka von Kalven's first question on why we are so late. And then I would like to hand over the question to Annegret Hase as well, because I guess she can talk about the situation in Germany as well. Very, very good.
Yeah. Thank you, Joska, and thank you, Eka. I think, great question around the deutsche Gründlichkeit. Which I don't think is a bad thing. I think that's a great, skill to have. I think maybe if you compare with our cultural background, maybe of to use an old example of the Vikings going into the boat and just going. There's a bit of maybe that culture here that just do it, don't think so much. But I also think that it relates to that here failure is okay. It shouldn't be a zero mistake culture. Failure is okay, and we have to learn from it. And also, conflict is okay. It's okay to disagree, and it's okay to have different opinions. But we still have to work together. And I think that's maybe strong here. That you don't lose your job because you do a mistake, depending on how bad it is. But so maybe that, I think when we work in the UK and also other places, there is this also a strong sentiment around risk. So if we do something, what's the risk for something to happen? And I think we try to turn that around also and saying, what's the risk of not doing anything? So I think, there's a lot of ways of saying, well, the current layout is not functioning. It has a lot of consequences on the people who live there, and we have to do something about it. And then we have to learn together what's the best solutions.
Yeah,
maybe that was it for me. Thanks.
That was on point. Thank you very much. Annegret Hase, maybe you want to add to this?
Yes, I was thinking we are doing a lot of transdisciplinary projects, for instance, on the cooperative greening in heterogeneous neighborhoods. And here we talk with our practice partners a lot about the difficulties that, for instance, real world labs or transdisciplinary experimentary approaches have in practice. Why they have such difficulties to be in line or to come in line with the bureaucracy and the normal procedures, for instance, in municipalities. And what we learned is that experimentation is very popular, attractive, but it's full of preconditions. You can't just go out there and do it, because you have to rethink all your routines. You have to share responsibility for money, for personnel. You have to share power, which is really full of preconditions. And I think you have also to have resources. One of the largest problems that we have in our projects is done from the side of municipalities. There is much openness and much goodwill, but very often a lack of resources, time, personnel. And I think, I don't want to say what we can learn from other countries, because I'm not just, I'm from Germany, but I think what we learned, and what I learned also through international projects, is that sometimes the fear to fail, which is, I think, very present in our municipalities, in the practice, also because of there is a fear to fail because money is being spent on something. And of course, experiments can also fail. But I think we have to develop a better failure culture and have to have a more open discussion on how we cope with experimentation, or how we get along with experimentation. So that would be, after very short time to think about it, would be some of the points that came into my mind when I listened to your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I guess it's totally true. I hand over to Naomi. There was a question for you as well on the degree of participation in decision making or in the final decision process. So what's your view on that?
Yes, Eka mentioned the problem with people being frustrated if in the end decisions have to be made by a parliament. And I think that's obviously something that we do not want to touch or don't want to change at this point. But it has to be considered an open process if we involve people and take their time. And all that I was trying to say with that point is that if we want to collect the voices, it should not come out later on that the decision had already been made. This is particularly important in projects that are planned by private investors, where they already know in advance that they want the highest number of apartments to be built, and they already have in mind a specific number of parking lots that should be built. And then, of course, if people find out afterwards, after they invested time participating in workshops and drawing their own models of how they imagine the development to look like, this can lead to a lot of frustration and the feeling that that was a fake participation. And I think, especially when talking about the inner city, it's more about collecting ideas, and we should start at a point where no decision has been made yet, or be quite open in the communication with the people and put all the cards on the table, tell them what has already been decided, what are the limitations in terms of investments that can be done, so people don't come up with ideas that are unrealistic to be put into practice.
Great, thank you very much. And then there was one last question for Andreas Köhler on the urban development of Pinneberg, for example. So, Mr. Köhler, please.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the question, because it's very correct that the Pinneberg, city of Pinneberg, is very close to Hamburg. And another huge city in our county is Elmshorn. It's a little bit more far away from that city of Hamburg. So there are very different cities in our county, and there are 10 or 12 kilometers between them. So, and I think the question was how to win people for or stakeholder for developing the city, and to make cities, especially the city of Pinneberg, more interesting to live there. I think it's not only a question or a part of the politicians of the land Schleswig-Holstein or the town of Pinneberg, maybe the mayor of Pinneberg, but I think it's more a part of the people who live in the city, the customers as well as the business people, and they are the really serious stakeholders of a town. And I think we should get them more trust in developing their own city. You can put some ideas as a mayor or as a politicians to get some topics in the discussion, but I think we have to trust the people in the city, and they do something about something with their own ideas to developing the city. We know the BIDs, the business improved districts. It was a fine idea in the 2000s or late 90s, to developing the inner cities with that instrument. But they're hanging very nice Christmas lights in the streets, so it was very nice. But they have they are not responsible for the city, only for the street or the city center, but they are not responsible for the city. And I think they should be some more trust from us, and we as the administrations, or also we as the politicians, could accompany or attended this process. And I think the people are interesting to come together and do also these things, because they are interested in city life, in their own city lives, and they have to collaborate or do collaborations, which is the key for me to develop the city for the people.
Perfect. Thank you very much. There is another comment from Naomi, which I would like to fit in here, and then I would hand over to Andreas. Naomi, please.
Thank you. I would like to add to something that Mr. Köhler just said, namely that we should trust more in the people to decide on what they think is right for their city. I think this is also about some practice, because if people are not used to understanding the complexity of making decisions, it is difficult for them to be on call or on duty on the spot. And I think the more participation we establish in a city and have a culture of participation, the better the decisions will be in the end, and the more understanding they are if their own input is not the one that is selected or the one that makes it in the end. And I think we should keep in mind that democracy is something that needs to be trained and learned as well, which is something that we can do with this tool, I think.
Yeah, that's so true. Thank you very much. There is another comment on that from Annegret Hase. Is it okay if we listen to her for another minute, Andreas? Perfect.
Thank you very much. I wanted to add to Naomi's contribution, because we are doing also a lot of participation projects, and I think we should also consider that participation is oriented today to huge heterogeneous or heterogeneity of people, because among the citizens who participate potentially, we have real experts in urban development, in planning, in different other fields of expertise. So people who are who have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, bring in all their professional skills. And for them, it's of course easy to predominate such a participation process, even at the neighborhood level. This is what we experienced in Leipzig, but Leipzig, I think, is no exception here. On the other hand, we have a lot of people who we want to approach by participation, want to include, but those people have a lot of barriers. And of course, I think Naomi's talk also underlines that we need to have very specified and let's say different approaches on participation, and we should ask ourselves who we want to reach, but also who we want to enable to take a certain role in participation. And so I think participation is a very, very complicated field itself in the reality of heterogeneous cities.
I guess we can agree on that, and that's where I would like to hand over to Andreas and just call out to each and every one of you who is watching our debate. You can all just give in your comments, your questions, if you use the Q&A function in Zoom, or if you watch us via YouTube, you can just comment, and we will raise your questions and comments in this debate. So feel free. Andreas.
Yeah, thank you. Very inspired speech altogether in this panel. I'm very inspired about your ideas, and I want to talk about two points. One point is the inner city economy, and one point is mobility. And let me start with inner city economy. I was 30 years ago, I was a youth worker, and there was a speak that we every time heard, bad graffitis is followed by bad graffitis, and good graffitis are followed by good graffitis. And this means that people need some inspired situation and to be creative, to transform their cities and their rooms where they live. And so that's my question. What can we do to give this new economic a chance? Because COVID crisis shows us how difficult it is for economy in the inner cities. It's not the crisis now. In the past, we have shopping, we have many shops, gamble shops.
Oh, sorry, Andreas.
Cheap stores.
Just stop your video for a second because your internet connection is pretty bad, I guess. So I guess we can hear you better now.
Okay, thanks. It's better now? Okay, I said bad graffitis follows by bad graffitis, and this is for the rooms where we live very important. When we will create, capture our rooms, our inner cities, that I've learned in youth work 30 years ago. And if you do this, you can start many positive developments and changes in cities and in rooms where you live. So my question is how we get more this recapture ideas to make a revolution, to give people the rooms back, to inspire them, to give them rooms to create new ideas. That's my question. How we do it? It is not a question of participation. It is a question of power. Many of the politicians in these cities are afraid to give these rooms new ideas started and startups for new ideas in this room. So what we can do to bring these ideas into the cities. I think about ideas like shops, unpacked. Yeah, it is a shop where you go and you can buy something what you need. It's not in plastic or other things packed, and this is a very good idea. Or what we can do against co-working spaces in cities and need some rooms for new ideas for working. So that's my first question. And the second question, in summer, I have my summer vacations with a sailboat. I sail from Kiel to Copenhagen, and I saw Mrs. Wamberg, this is wonderful cycle slang. You drive with. We have some scooters and with electric scooters, and we drive the lane, and we saw the street food inventions. We come very soon to Nihon. And all these near very interesting tourism, very interesting places in Copenhagen are very near together when you need a new mobility things. So what is your idea to bring more this combined ideas, tourism, new economic and mobility together? And how is the situation now in Copenhagen? When will Copenhagen be car free? Is it a discussion about your city administration? I saw it as I'm a chairman of the traffic committee of Schleswig-Holstein Landtag. 4 years ago, we stay 4 days in Oslo, and we saw this enormously investment in infrastructure and for electromobility. In Copenhagen, I saw many cars without motors and not with electric cars. How is your what will you do for this new innovations for electronic mobility in Copenhagen?
Henriette Wamberg, I guess these questions were directly for you, so feel free to answer them. And
yeah, thank you. So thank you, Andreas, for a challenging, very big question. So I will only scratch the surface, and then I invite you to travel north in a while when you can, and then we can talk more. So I think in terms of the mobility for Copenhagen, What is being discussed and planned now is to free up the inner city center for completely for cars. So not for servicing or rubbish and whatever has to go in and out, but for driving through the core of the city center that will be closed. And it's they're starting some rehearsal programs this summer, where they will start in some streets and measure what can be done. How does it work? What comes instead? How does it function? And there's a participation part of that as well. So that is being discussed here more on the car-free city in the inner city. But then I think in Copenhagen there's still I think Copenhagen to some degree is also an example of a city that is trying to balance things. So it's not saying that the car doesn't have a role at all. So the car is still there, but we need to balance. So we need to make good conditions for everything, and it shouldn't, with the car, it shouldn't be at the expense of everyone else. And also, we're trying to change the pyramid so that we get the active mobility at the top and invest quite a lot in public transport. So huge investment in metro and bus system and trains and what have you. And that is underpinning also the success of Copenhagen. So we need that. Again, I'm just scratching the surface. So maybe Jaska, you stop me when my time is out. But I think on the electric vehicles, I think maybe there's a bit of a reservation here in terms of that it's just another car. So there is that kind of reservation that it's, I think if we look at it in terms of public transport, there's some interesting aspects also in lower density areas in terms of how can we, and driverless vehicles, how can we actually start to service lower density areas in a different way than what we can now, and maybe also in a cheaper way with public transport than what we've been able to do before. So I think that's definitely something that's being discussed here. So there's quite a lot going on. And again, this is just, scratching the surface. I would invite you up here and then we can spend an afternoon talking more about it.
I guess we would all love to spend an afternoon in Copenhagen to see, experience, and talk about some projects and latest developments. So we are really looking forward to that. I would like to raise two more questions. One with a more participatory perspective. We were talking a lot about the quiet voices, and when we heard your presentation, Annegret Hase and Henriette Wambeck, I remember the children played a big role in them. And I guess it's one thing to try to get into, or to get their perspective in the way you experience a room. I also think that it might be interesting on the one or another opportunity to get their perspective into a planning process and into the design and into designing new urban areas and places. And my question on that is just, how do we do it? Is it does it make sense? Should we do it? And if we do so, how do we do it? Maybe a question to Henriette and Naomi, and then I would have another question, but maybe we go with that one first.
Yeah, now I'll just go for it. Sorry, Naomi. But so I think maybe, I would use it as a little segue to just to talk about a project in London with young people. So not the very small, but actually a young people. And that was a project that was looking at obesity amongst young people in South London. And that project was looking at how can we initiate or support behavior change around healthy food through urban design and through participation. So that it was quite interesting in terms of when you looked at the foodscapes and what was around in London. They have banned commercials for fast food. But if you look at the route from the school to the bus stop, it's full of Kebabistan and McDonald's straight at the bus stop. So what's the point, right? So there was through that, it was quite an interesting process of completely acknowledging our own white middle class backgrounds, and how we really had to work with, to Naomi's point, with local community workers that understood the diverse ethical and social backgrounds, but also could help to translate the messaging back and forth. And it was a quite involved process trying to understand that it was actually not about the food, but it was about having places to meet that felt safe and open, where you could stay for a long time without being kicked out, and trying to understand what these places are offering that we should also be offering. I think back to Andreas's point, in the cities for young people, where it's not about fast food, but where it's about having a proper meeting place. And that was a very nice way of learning and of actually understanding how urban design needs to support this behavior change around health. And also, I think for us personally, understanding how we can almost only fail in the participation because there's so much we don't understand, but we still have to do it and learn from it and work with others because or else we are never going to get there.
I guess that's a great comment. Thank you very much. Henriette, I've got Naomi now, and I also see Eka von Kalben and Annegret Hase raising their hands. So I would take your points on that after Naomi.
Yeah, I don't want to drag this out too long. I think Henriette said most of what matters in this regard. There are, of course, different tools if you go into a neighborhood or into a space where you can meet the children. Of course, you cannot expect them to be involved in a regular participation process like grown-ups and talk in a public forum or come to a participation bus on their own. But there are a lot of tools that could be used, like having a regular meeting day in a kita, for example, in a daycare facility, and having like meeting evenings with the parents, and then having like little workshops. But it's very different from the regular participation that you would usually apply.
Cool. Thank you, Naomi. Eka.
Yes, I want to come back to my first thinking. Why is it in Germany different to live or to go into a city than in Italy or maybe in Copenhagen? And especially with family. I have 3 children and I traveled a lot, and it was always a pleasure to be in other cities than in German cities with the children. So, but what I think, and that was the question before I had with the stakeholders, when I think on a German city, maybe Pinneberg, it doesn't mind, then the stakeholders are the people who own the houses and rent them to the shops. And so the shops owners, they say, what do we need for the city? And this is what we need, is to have a lot of customers. And that's a difference to what we think about city, to be intercultural, to invite families just to stay there, even if they're not having a lot of shopping interests. And in the first panel today, we were talking a lot about budget, about taxes. I think Naomi or someone was talking, maybe it was Ellen, I don't know, Mrs. Hase, that the budget is often not enough. The cities in Schleswig-Holstein, they don't own very much money to change something. So a lot of changes come from private investors who say, we are interested in a busy city and we want to have a lot of people here. And my thinking is, when we change from the shopping street to the recreation street, I think this was what Henriette told us in Copenhagen, then there is nobody anymore who wants to invest beside the public. And the public, you know, has not so much money. So if we think about like a park or so in the cities, you always have only the public sector to pay for everything. And I think we need also the private sector to make some investment in the cities. And I haven't got that. You know, if you ask the people what do you want, then they want maybe different things than the people who want to sell iPhones.
Thank you, Ika, for this point. And I guess it perfectly fits that Annegret Hase is next to speak.
Yes, thank you. I will come back to the issue of children's participation, of children's involvement. I think I can just give you some interesting ideas from our Leipzig experience, where, for instance, there were some projects, and the result was a neighborhood map out of the perspective of children. So it was an experiment. So the actors and the participants were just children who could just design a map where they just put places where they like to go, where they like to meet, where they don't like to be, points of attraction. So a children's map out of the children's perspective. And the result was also just as a plan that could be used by children and by families. I found the approach interesting, that it was the wants and needs and perceptions of children that were central to this approach, and not just of participants at all. The second, what I wanted to say is that we have a lot of neighborhood initiatives in Leipzig's inner east, which is a real heterogeneous area with a lot of people with different incomes, migrants, a very dynamic and fastly changing area. And the interesting is that the neighborhood initiatives, some of them are organizing festivals or events or discussion rounds, and they make children at an equal level participants of these events. So a voice of a child is being taken as seriously as any other voice. And I think this also learns or teaches children that they have a voice and are not just only passive participants, or are just being determined by what the adults decide. So I think that also the approach to take people serious, I think this is important for the inclusion or the participation of any group. Maybe you have to find specific ways for involving them, but I think there is a crucial prerequisite is to take them seriously and to take the risk that you are getting very interesting, innovative, other let's say feedbacks, and you have to deal with that.
And I guess this kind of challenging is great for urban development, and also to challenge your own ideas. So yes. Thank you very much for that. I've got 2 more people raising their hands, or 3 more people. Next would be Jonas Godau from Kiel Marketing, right? And then Inken Reimer from the Christian Albrechts University, and then next Naomi again. And I also got another question, which I hopefully can raise at the end of the meeting. So Jonas Godau, you're welcome.
Yeah, I won't start my video because my internet connection is not that good, so I won't start with that. I think I got 2 things. One is the participation of children, and I think we need to start more cooperation with schools and universities, because that's where the people are. And I think if we cooperate, either administration or we as key marketing, we get more information from these people. And if it's just I think the best about children is the honesty, because they just say what they think. They see something and they say it's good or it's bad. And I think that's what we should take, because all the other actors, when we have participation, they have some kind of benefit thinking, or they do have something in their mind, and the children just say what they think. And I think that's what we have to use for a better city. That's the one point. And the other was about the stakeholders and the owners. I think we need the private investment, and the thing is, the owners are the people who say what happens with their building. So we can have visions and anything about what the building will look like in 10 years. We need to take them. So it's a part of participation and develop visions for their buildings and for the inner city with them. So we take them on a journey. What will the city look like? And then we have to give them opportunities to invest and have the regulations, because some people are there and they want to invest, but they can't. And some want to invest, but they don't have the right projects. So, for example, we do have in Kiel a temporary use, which is called the Cosmos. It's like a multi-used space. You have a shop, you have a cafe, you have you will have the opportunity to of co-working, and that's a project where the owner says, "Yeah, I want to invest with this." It's not a company; it's Open Campus, which is like, yeah, a group working for many startups. And since he knows what this project can do, he will invest, because he knows this project will help not only his building but the whole inner city to look at new target groups. And I think to connect good project with the owners who want to do something, that's the thing we have to do in the future, because there are people who want to invest. And yeah, that's what my thing is to do in the future, really. And I think we shouldn't think that the owners don't want to do something and just look at the rent. It still is their business model, but when you have the right project and the right vision, they might be able to invest more in the future of the city.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, Jonas. And actually, we were talking about vacancies earlier, and I guess we definitely need good projects, like, for example, the Cosmos store by Open Campus, to have great projects in all the vacancies we have in our inner cities. And we were also talking about ways to reduce vacancies by putting pressure on the owners to use their spaces, for example, by, for instance, by developing an idea like the non-use tax for places and buildings in the inner city. An interesting thought, as at least I think, that came up in the first round today, I guess. Next would be Inken Reimer. Inken, good to have you in this discussion.
Can you see me? Yes, seems to be okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me to ask my question, or rather it's maybe a few comments and a question. I'm situated at the School of Sustainability at the Kiel University, and we try to do a lot of outreach projects. So bring the students out and explore the city with them, or let them explore the city. And I was, since we have a few sort of academically placed people here as well, I often wonder, where do we start and who are we? So is it sort of the responsibility of me as being rather a sort of teacher to start something, or is it upon the students to start something themselves? I think we have a lot of initiative placed on their side, so to say, or where do we actually make a point and the starting point? And I wonder that, or I'm particularly interested, I guess, rather than having a knowledge or an expertise in it, is how and where do we start transforming the places? And looking at the university campus right at the moment, for example, I feel that it's an almost empty space, which is quite a huge space, which is not even really part of the city of Kiel, or at least I often feel that it isn't. And we have a lot of empty offices there. We have a lot of empty spaces. We have hardly any participation or meeting and interaction of people, not only of students, but also of staff. And I guess I wonder where could be a good starting point, or how do we change this, and who is we? And I feel that especially looking at Kiel, that is sort of my question right now. What would be concrete next steps, or what can we do to actually make a change? And having listened to some of the inputs earlier also in the sessions, I also wondered, sort of, there's good initiatives, there's some co-work spaces. Oli Berg gave some input from the co-work land, but yeah, is these sort of very small projects, is it enough to transform a city, or do we just need a lot of years of patience in order to actually change something, or do we just need enough small starting points, projects all spread all over the city? And whose responsibility is it? Is it everyone's citizens' responsibility? Is it politics together with the citizens or administrators, or who's doing what? So it's rather comments than questions, so not directed at anyone in particular, but maybe someone can say something about it. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you very much, Inken. And I guess we can just all say something on that, or at least our participants can say something on that. Naomi, you also raised your hand. Do you want to comment?
Yes, I wanted to respond to something that Ika said earlier about financing changes in the inner cities, and the fact that cities in Schleswig-Holstein usually don't have the budget to perform large transformations. And I think a tool, and I don't know how applicable this is to Schleswig-Holstein, is the tool of Konzeptverfahren, Konzeptausschreibung in urban development, instead of having Bieterverfahren. I'm sorry, I don't know the English terms for this. But this usually means that the city has more of a say in what kind of development is allowed to be done by the private investor who is buying a certain property. And maybe it would be an idea to have not only a professional jury deciding on who wins the Konzeptausschreibung, but also have a citizen jury involved in this. This would just be one suggestion. And I know that the Konzeptverfahren have been quite successful in cities like Potsdam, for example. And who's responsible for participation? I mean, I think if we go a few steps back, I think participation itself should only happen if there's something to decide, as I said earlier on. But there's also the stage that has to happen before participation can take place, which is the empowerment of people. And I think that is something that everyone who feels like they have the opportunity to do that can become active. And in Hamburg-Wilhelmsburg, for example, there's a lot of citizens being active and taking it upon themselves to empower the people around them. And they're actually finding projects themselves that they can become active in. So maybe if you as an institution or as an individual person feel like you have the capacity in terms of knowledge or money or political connections, you should start with trying to gather people and empowering a group of people to voice their opinion, rather than starting a whole participation process.
Yeah, thank you very much, Naomi, and very good thoughts on that. I'm looking at the time, and time is running out, and I see the hands of Henriette Warmbeck and Annegret Hase, and I would just like you maybe to just give your comments, and also maybe give us like, let's make this like the last round, and then I would ask Naomi and Mr. Köhler to comment as well on maybe one last question. I would have so much more, but we have to discuss them when we like grab a cup of coffee later this year, maybe, hopefully. I would just like maybe like break it down on where to start, like which is the one thing you would like to take us with us with the for the processes in the future. And I would really be happy if you could give us your comment on that as well, and then I would give the space to Henriette again.
Thank you. So I will try to make it short. But so there's been a lot of interesting, I think, comments raised, and I think just to maybe give hope on the private sector that I think Jonas also talked about, that we definitely see investment from private sector also in public space, and I think we need to also get to a point where public space is an asset and it gives value to buildings around it and property owners. And I think that's the growing recognition. So we see that. I had a couple of examples on that. The main street we're looking at closing, that will be paid for by private sector, very minor part by public. We see that in a number of other cities, very much in London. I think also in Germany, actually, with some of the projects we've been involved in. Maybe it goes under the radar a bit more in terms of that, how it's being done. So I think that is definitely coming. Then also just raising that, I remember that there's this organization called Capital of Children, which is funded partly by the Lego Foundation. It's in Lego City, and there's some interesting learnings from them also on how to involve children in public participation. And to Jonas's point, how they are very honest in their feedback. So they actually depressingly prefer the local car park because there you can smoke and talk without being supervised by the parents. Great. So yeah, and then on the universities, definitely, there's a lot that can be started there, and also just by understanding what students need. And I think sometimes it's about just getting started, just do it, and defining a program that maybe it can sit under, whether it's a program called Space to Play or whatever it is. It doesn't, and it can be shared amongst private and public sector of identifying, what is some of the most needed spots. And I think also maybe not going for the high aims at first, but going for something that almost certainly would be a success, not too hard to do, and that can then start a catalyst of an appetite for getting, having more successes, more collaboration that we can see works.
Thank you very much for these short but still so holistic comments on this huge amount of matters we are discussing in this round. So thank you very much. Annegret Hase, you also raised your hand, and I would like to hear from you, your last perspective here.
Yes, thank you. I will just give some very short feedback to Inken Reimer to the question. We have some experiences in my town or in my city where, for instance, vacant housing and vacant neighborhoods, they were organized so-called guardian houses. That means vacant buildings that should be kept and maintained. And there were invited young people, initiatives, artists, others who looked for space for their activities for little money. And so these two interests were just brought together. And I think and cooperation and experimentation and new ideas function or can work. At least two or more parties should have common interests or should develop a shared room of interests. Another example is that we have in Leipzig's Inner East, I already talked about this neighborhood. There's a project to develop a neighborhood school, and it is called neighborhood school because this the aim is to organize the work of the school actively together with the neighborhood, so that neighborhood initiatives, for instance, can rent rooms in the school, that neighborhood sports initiatives can also work together with school sports initiatives, etc. pp. What means that the function of the school is not just the school, but also a school for the neighborhood and a meeting point and a point of interaction with the neighborhood. These two approaches maybe give you an idea how you could just better integrate the university and the place and also the students and to bring people together. I don't know nothing about the location of Kiel's University, but maybe this is something you could just, that can feed your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Annegret Hase, for your thoughts and your ideas. I guess Inken can work with them pretty good, and I hope you can take them with you. So maybe for another last comment, Naomi and Mr. Köhler, a word to you. Naomi.
Yeah, I feel like there is already quite a lot of discussion on how we're transforming inner cities. And I think that this discussion is really great, that it's taking more and more space also within politics and society. So I'm really glad that the debate is opened, and I feel like that's the most important starting point.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we are really looking forward to keep on debating and keep on developing good thoughts for the transformation of the inner city. So, Mr. Köhler, what's your thought on that?
Yes, I'm very close to Naomi because I think the responsibility for the city, for the inner city, gives the responsibility to the people who live in that area. Is probably one key solution to develop our city, our inner city. And we have in Europe or in Germany a worldview that's very different to the African worldview. You know, maybe Ubuntu. Ubuntu says, no, the European view is I am because I think I am. And the African worldview of this is I am because we are. Making things together is much better to get effort than do things for your own. I think bring people together and give them the responsibility to do that what they want, and what the city need is one part of the effort, I think.
Thank you very much for this thought and for your participation. There's one last thought from the comment section or the Q&A section where Klaus Schütt wrote what Henriette Warmbeck was telling about Copenhagen. Seems like it is described as the perfect inner city. A good city center is like a good party. You come along and stay longer than expected. I can only agree to that. And I hope many can share this thought. All that's left for me is to say thank you very much. Thank you for joining our discussion. Thank you for bringing in your experience, your knowledge, your thoughts, and your ideas. I really appreciated talking with all of you, and I'm really looking forward to bring all these thoughts and ideas and knowledge into action in the next months and years. And we will definitely continue this process, this work on this topic and these issues. And feel free to join us at 7 p.m. where we will have our final debate, actually then back in German. But it was glad to talk with all of you, to discuss with you, to listen to you. And now have a nice evening, a nice weekend. And to those I will see you later. Thank you very much.